So this is so much fun because, again, as we're interacting with visitors here at the park, it's really helpful for us to kind of get a sense of what kinds of special things do they need in order to have commercial services here. And so that's involving concessions, commercial use authorizations, special use permits in lieu of commercial use authorizations, and the ones we work with the most are going to be the special use permits. Okay? So the commercial services literally is relating to, it has to take place at least in part here in the National Park Service. It's got to use park resources, and it's programmed or packaged either by an individual or an organization, and it's going to result in some kind of compensation, monetary gain, benefit, or profit. Okay, so that's where we're coming from in terms of it being commercial. So concessions contracts, we actually do have some concessioners here in the park, and the big ones are contract based, so they're 10 years in length if somebody gets a contract. Some other ones are providing what we call a required service, and the Park Service isn't obligated to provide, is obligated to provide support and access for that. The big ones for us in terms of here is Rainier Guest Services. So RGS, you'll hear that acronym a lot. So RGS is going to be in terms of lodging, retail, foods, and beverages. So here in Paradise, that means here in the JVC with our little concessionaire over at the Paradise Inn. In Longmire, that's going to be at the National Park Inn. And then over at Sunrise, that's going to be in the Day Lodge. That's RGS. Now we also have all the guide services that are required to have contracts in order to fulfill their duties here, and that is going to be Alpine Ascents International, International Mountain Guides, and Rainier Mountaineering Incorporated. We do have one other, so John Squires actually has a contract to sell firewood over at Ohana and the White River campground areas. Commercial use authorizations can be for any of these reasons. So it's going up to the summit, an overnight backpacking trip, having a guided hike, doing a bicycle tour. They can be during the winter, they can be overnight. You can have it be one of the campgrounds that you're driving into, so that might be Cougar Rock, Ohanabacosh, White River, and then we also do have the Mowich Lake area that has some campsites, and photography and art courses. So all of those are authorized but not required to offer some type of activity. And so they don't have a contract. It's a little different than with the concessionaires, because that's an actual contract that both parties are liable for different portions. So this is for an individual company, a nonprofit, anything like that, that might have a commercial service. The only exception is for portraiture. So,
A question of the mountaineers and that.
Mhm.
So is there a decrease? I mean, do they get their permits first for mountaineering?
yeah, so
Or do individuals, or how does that work?
So when we're talking about concessions contracts, so those three organizations in particular for the climbing permits, they as an organization apply and they get a contract, and they're the ones that are for 10 years typically. And then the individuals who want to contract them to go on a trip, they're going through an organization that already has.
They're all permitted.
Yeah.
And in addition, the park gives individual permits to people that may not want to go to the dive.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
There's no limit to those. Is there any limit to those annually, or is it as many people?
Through the commercial use or the special use permits?
Yeah, is there any cap on that annually?
No, the only cap you're gonna think about in terms of especially the climbing involved is how many people are allowed to camp overnight in different portions of the park. And so up at Camp Muir, they're allowed to have up to 120 people max in that area. Once that's filled, and it's filled now every weekend. I was talking to the climber rangers just yesterday, and they said all of those permits are full. And so people, instead of being able to camp around Camp Muir area, might have to go a little further to Ingraham Flats or another location to camp before they attempt their summit climb. So when we're out in the field, you are allowed to ask some questions. Again, we're not enforcement, we're education, so I want to make sure that you understand. So you are allowed to ask a question. If you see something that just doesn't look right, or there's a big group of people who potentially are out in the meadow, you are allowed to ask if they have a special use permit. And looking at that is two things in order to verify that it's okay. One is the expiration date. So when do they have to finish this activity by? And the second thing is it has to have two signatures. So one is the permittee, the person who's asked for it, and the second is somebody from Mount Rainier, and that's usually Josh, who signs that. If those two things don't match, they don't have a valid permit, so they're not supposed to be where they are. And here's the big thing for us. On these permits, as we're looking at them, I apologize, it's not super clear. It tells the permittee exactly where they are allowed to be, the time frame they are allowed to do that activity, and if there's anything special about it, it'll say on that permit, okay? So as you're looking at that, they're never going to say that they're allowed to be in a large party off trail, for example, getting photos. We do have a lot of wedding parties that come up here to the park, but they're still supposed to follow all the other regular rules. They gave us some statistics. It's a little difficult to see, but the top one, the largest bar there is for day use hiking. On the far right, that's the next biggest group. That's for skiing and snowshoeing during the winter time. And we also have bicycle tours, summer backpacking, climbing and mountaineering, and photography. But the summertime definitely hiking permits to do special activities for groups is the biggest.
So like a church group or?
Yeah, exactly. And for us, again, special use permits are probably the things that we interact with the most. And when you come into either here at Paradise or over at Sunrise, there's a list of are there any special use permits known for that particular day. So for example, today we do have permission for some folks to spread some ashes up here in the Paradise area. And the big thing is this is for an individual, group, or an organization. It's not for the public at large, okay? So somebody is asking to do something special here at the park, and on the right-hand side, these are the types of activities that they're getting a special use permit for. By far, the biggest ones that we see are going to be the weddings, The second biggest one is gonna be spreading ashes. We have a lot of folks who do that. And the thing to remember is, first, we know that it's happening. Second is there anything we can do to assist the group so that they are following the permit? And maybe, especially with scattering ashes, I know that some of you have had the case that the people didn't know where they wanted to spread the ashes. Or they wanted to maybe go up to Panorama Point and do that, but it was 2 months ago when everything was still snowed in, and they had no idea that that was the case. And so they talked to some rovers who knew about the permit, and the rovers were able to give them some alternative places of what would be safer and what would make more sense for them to spread those ashes. So it's just really helpful for us to have a sense of like what's happening here in the park, what people have permission to do, and how we can help support them. The biggest change that we've had in the last year is to commercial filming, and I really wanted to make sure to recognize this for everybody, is that there was a lawsuit that in January 22nd of 2021, so a little over a year ago now, there's a decision that the permit and fee requirements apply to commercial filming, and they are unconstitutional. So in response to the decision, the National Park Service says that managing film activities it's right now under some interim guidance, but filming may require permits if they would impact park resources or the visitor experience. So I don't know if any of you were up here over the last 3 days, but we actually had a film crew that got a permit, and they were allowed to bring their own helicopter in to the national park and do some filming around the area, and especially around the glacial area from the Nisqually Glacier. So they had a permit, and it was kind of fun. As we're looking out the windows or outside here, you could see them doing their filming. And
You gotta tell us, what's the movie?
oh, I don't know yet. Yeah, I don't know. But they were up here doing some of that. So.
Is that the one that was doing the documentary on ice worms?
Oh, is it?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, cool. I didn't even know. So, beach house filming, right? So, about ice works. That's really amazing.
Maureen, do the photography or ashes permits allow people to roam through the meadows kind of wherever they want to look for the spot to get that perfect picture or bury those ashes?
So, for the ashes in particular, they are typically allowed to go off trail up to about, well, and they're required to be somewhat off trail by 200 to 300 feet usually. Each permit is worded slightly different depending on where they are, okay? But the big thing is they are not supposed to just dump the ashes in one place.
Yeah.
And we've experienced that. We've definitely had that, that we helped disperse them afterwards. Usually what I recommend is somebody's up here in the Paradise area in particular, is to have them find an area that's wooded, that they can step aside into the woods and not have a lot of people observing them and watching them do this. Disperse the ashes and then come back onto trail. The big thing in the permit says that they cannot be close to any source of water. Okay, that's the big thing, especially up here in the Edith Creek Basin, because it's our drinking water source, yeah, for the entire Paradise area. So they put that in their permit that they are not allowed to be near any water sources.
Is there a limitation on the number of people that can participate? I mean,
There is,
and
yep.
it's in the permit.
It's in the permit, yeah, and that's the nice thing for us. If you do happen to see somebody, it'll say whether or not they're allowed to have, usually for ashes, it's a small number, usually it's 6 or less. Do you have a question?
How would you handle a situation if you are out roving and see someone there to disperse ashes without a permit? It's a very delicate situation.
It
So
is.
what would you handle that?
So the big thing is, let's say you come in and you've been upstairs to check out and there's no special use permit listed. That means that we don't know about anything that's supposed to be happening here this day. And you see somebody who is dispersing ashes. Discretion, you know, so make sure other people aren't around and just say, hey friends, you doing okay? Kind of get it, a lot of times they'll kind of self-disclose. And then just gently bring up, just so you know, this usually requires a special use permit. Did you happen to see that on our website? And just give them a sense of what they were supposed to have done. A lot of times people, when you tell them that a special use permit was required for whatever the instance is, they'll go back and do that permit afterwards to make sure that they don't get in trouble. The other big thing is with price versus bar in terms of still photography. So the park, we still regulate photography if it takes place in a location where or when members of the public are generally not allowed. Okay, so let's say they wanted to do some of this special filming with the ice worms. They included filming and still photography in the permit because they did go out to some of the glacial areas and get regular photography photographs that would have required a permit to go on the glacier. But here's the big shift for us. In the past, if we saw like a wedding party, having photos or people coming in to maybe get engagement photos or things like that, they're not required to have a permit for that anymore. The wedding itself, yes, but any photos related to special events, people aren't required to have permits to do that anymore. So that's been a big shift since last year for us to know about. I know in the past, if I saw a big group, I would go to the photographer and ask, hey, just check in, do you have a special use permit? I didn't know about one today. And talk to the photographer in particular. They are not required to get a permit anymore. So the big shift has been if any of us can be in a location to get a photo, so can they. Okay. So just keep that in mind. But the one thing to remember is how big is the group, right? If they're 12 or smaller, no problem. If they're 12 or more, that's going to bump them into a different category that they would potentially need a special use permit, or we would ask them to separate so it wouldn't impact all the other visitors of having such a large group in one place, that other people were being impacted by their use.
So what if it's like a family reunion, family vacation, and there's like 30 plus people all gathering and they want to take a picture together?
Yeah. So if it's that one picture, and again, they're not stepping off trail, or let's say they're on the dance floor, because that's a really nice place to get a group picture. One group picture, no big deal. But are they all hiking at the same pace, at the same point? Chances are with a group that size, they aren't. But it's good to remind them of letting other people use the trail and to step aside, because when you have large groups like that, it does affect everybody else. We also have First Amendment rights. So people can apply for a special use permit And this is related to freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly. And we have different areas around the park that people are allowed to have demonstrations. And they're very defined for the locations. And there, as you can see, it's a 20 by 20 area in the vast majority of the park. Cougar Rock Campground, it's going to be in the amphitheater area. The big thing for us to know about, again, is going to be Paradise and Sunrise. So at Paradise, the X marks the spot. So as we're looking back from the JVC out toward the parking lot with the flagpole area, that's where the First Amendment rights demonstration area is here in Paradise. So on occasion, when you come up to Paradise, you might see a group of people over in that area, and they can have tables, they can have some music, they can have things that they're giving away, a variety that you might see people in that particular area. And when you come upstairs, you'll see that there's a special use permit for First Amendment rights. And similarly, over in Sunrise, the star, the red star marks the spots, and that is from the parking area near the restrooms as you're going up to the blockhouses and the visitor center. So they're allowed to be in that area.
But they have to have a special use permit to do that.
They do, and the special use permit, again, is gonna allow them to do what they're asking to do. And we always, with a group, anytime you have a big group like that, especially we all want them to be in the proper areas so it doesn't impact everybody else. And again, this is something that you are allowed to ask for, to see their special use permit. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, no problem. Again, we're not typically enforcement, we're education. But the big thing is, if they don't have one, then you can do that education part and say, hey, I'm just checking in. It doesn't sound like you knew the procedures to get a special use permit. It's all available online. And here at Paradise, the nice thing is we've got cell service. So they're able to get online and submit that request. They're supposed to do it hopefully a week or so in advance, but they can kind of post date it to make sure that they're getting that kind of after the fact. In terms of special use permits, what they're, the highest numbers are going to be weddings, special events. So again, maybe it's that family reunion. We've got organized group recreation, so maybe it was that church group or the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, a large group that was coming in for a special event. And First Amendment, those are the top ones there.
And part of the reason that First Amendment is so large is because one of the most significant permit holders here in the park is a group called a Christian Ministry in the national parks. And they have a recurring permit to provide non-denominational religious services at Cougar Rock and Ohattapacosh campgrounds. So that's every week.
All of those various uses, none of them allow unfettered roaming through the meadows. They've got to be on trail. If it's a wedding party, they got to line up on a trail someplace. Mm-hmm. And a photographer can't roam around to get that perfect view. He's got to stay on the trail.
Yeah, so I always love it when the photographer, in particular, I feel like I'm picking on the photographers, but they are going off trail, but they're walking on rocks out into the meadow to get that perfect photo. But we have to remember that the rocks are still going to impact the soil. So as you're stepping on it, it can change the moisture in the soil for that particular area, and you can still kill some of the plants by doing that. So you might not be stepping on the plant itself, but you still might be affecting the plant. And the other big thing we all know is that you see one person doing it, what's everybody else gonna do? They're gonna follow suit, right? It's that social instinct that we see one person doing it, it must be okay. So
If a
They
photographer or videographer feels that they have a legitimate reason to go off of the trail, then they may file a request for a special use permit and explain that reasoning, and then the park can decide
Yes.
whether to issue that or not. Maybe they are National Geographic magazine and they're doing a special report on some endangered species or something like that. In which case the park would probably work with them to figure out what's the best place to go, the best time to do it, maybe send someone along with them to help minimize the impact if they approve it at all.
And again, for commercial services, Josh and Ellie are our two contacts here at the park. And so if you have any questions related to this information that they've provided for us today, let me know and I will forward that along to them just to get some clarification for us. But I just wanted to kind of share some of this information because I know as we're out on trails and seeing some of these groups, it's nice to know some of the background of what we're seeing. That they do have to go through quite a bit of paperwork and pay to get the special use permit. And I know we have a photographer in the crowd here. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience of getting special use permits?
You said I didn't have to.
Oh, yeah, you don't have to.
No,
No,
I'm
if
good.
you-
That's why I checked with Kevin at
Oh,
the
yeah.
last session
Yeah.
to see if I need them. But I think for what I'm doing, because it's not providing monetary compensation for the video.
So before the law changed, had you ever had to get special use permits?
Yes, because I used to work for Travel Channel, so
Okay.
you would have to do it for a period there. And then when I was guiding somebody, some of the marketing material we were doing for the recreation program I worked for, we had to do nothing. And that was right when the laws went into place. Yeah.
Thanks. Not to mean to put
No,
you on the
that's
spot,
fine.
but I
I mean,
knew
I
that
was
you had
very
this like,
unsure about it.
yeah, I
That's
didn't
why
know.
I
Yeah.
reached out to you a few weeks ago about it.
Yeah. So then it's interesting that, you know, that change has affected a lot of people being able to have more access to come up and do your own photography. The fun part, you know, like last night we had the Astro crew out for night sky programming, and doing astrophotography has definitely become a big interest here at the park, of people coming up at really late hours to get their astro photos with the stars as it's going over the mountain, and they don't need to get a permit to do that.
Is there any part of the park that's registered that's there?
Nope, we are not considered, we haven't gone through that process.
Is there gonna be a night shift for rovers now?
Wouldn't that be fun?
We are kind of the next tier from dark sky. Because of light pollution from Seattle and Portland, we just don't quite meet that threshold.
Can they get the special use only online, or is it also available at, here at Paris?
So the process is, they fill out the paperwork, submit it to Josh and Ellie, and then Josh and Ellie are the ones who are looking through to make sure that it doesn't impact anybody, you know, what they're asking for. So that it's not immediate, so it's not,
It's not like that day they show up and they
no,
wanna,
yeah, they
they don't
really
want it.
do need to plan ahead.
so it's online.
It's online, yeah. And again, typically they're asking for at least a week lead time. Kind of reminds me of camping for rovers, right? Sorry, I couldn't resist.
So if we see a group of 12 or more,
Mm-hmm.
on the day that there's nothing on the board upstairs,
Mhm.
we can approach them and politely ask if they have an SUP.
Yeah. You know, and before you even get to that question, I'd be like, oh, wow, you guys are such a big group. Like, are you here for a special event or something? You know, like, try to kind of pull out some of that information from them. And chances are you'll get what you need to be able to kind of explain that they're in a group that's too big to be traveling by themselves, that they need to either split up into two smaller parties. They can come together to get those photos and then split up again, so they're not impacting other visitors.
How about if they just stay in the parking lot area, do they still need an SUP?
No.
One of the things that helps is to remember that the purpose of the special use permit is just to protect the park and to protect the visitor experience in the park. And so if you present it to people in those terms, people are usually very understanding and compliant. And even if they don't have a special use permit, the real issue is protecting the park. So you know, cracking down on them and lowering the boom and, you know, anything like that is not really what's important. What's important is making sure that what they're doing is not impacting the park or the visitor experience.
And again, educating so that if they come up again in the future, they know what they should be doing. And they'll get the permit that gives them really good information about what they can and cannot do and where they can and cannot do that.
For the commercial filming, would drones ever be allowed in that situation, or are drones just never?
According to the superintendent's compendium, drone use can be permitted by the superintendent. That said, park policies are pretty strict with respect to use of drones. So it would you'd have to probably make a pretty remarkable argument to get that exception.
So if we run into a small group or even one person that's operating a drone, and would we ask if they have a special use permit, or do we immediately?
No, we immediately do our roving discussion with them, like,
Affecting the
yeah,
enjoyment of others
affecting the wildlife.
and
So far as I know, we have only permitted drones for two things here in the park so far. One of them is for certain research purposes that can only safely happen with the use of drones, and the second is for search and rescue, again to provide services that cannot safely be done otherwise. But it's a case-by-case basis.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. So, again, today was all about how are we interacting with the visitors, and what are our perceptions, what are their perceptions, and just taking a minute to think about how we're doing that, and hopefully between the implicit bias training that Mo has provided and a little background information of what's happening with concessions and special use permits helps us do that a little better. If you have any questions, feel free. If you don't think of any right now, just send us an email and we'll follow up with you. And then we are ready to switch over. So those of you who have signed up for the rope and rebar portion of the training, feel free to grab all of your gear and go meet Travis out at the flagpole area. He should be there already for you. And everybody else, again, thank you so much for being here this morning. And I know a bunch of you are going to be going up to Rove. So go ahead. Chuck is acting coordinator today, so he's up there ready for you to check out with him. And I know I've got some special training set aside for a couple people, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much for being here.